Syria is a country where the headlines are often about geopolitics, about conflict and violence. But there's a much deeper story, and that's about how communities have fractured, how they've adapted, and how they're trying to rebuild after years of conflict. I'm Dominic Bowen, host of the International Risk podcast, and I'm joining you from Damascus in Syria. Today, we're talking about identity. We're talking about how it was governed in Syria under the Assad regime before 2011, how it was weaponized and reshaped during the conflict years, and also what it means to reconstruct identity and how to reconstruct identity balances when trust is thin, institutions are reforming, and external powers are still shaping many incentives on the ground. My guest today is Ola Rifai. She's the Deputy Director for Outreach at the Centre for Syrian Studies at the University of St Andrews. And her work explores identity politics, nationalism, sectarian dynamics, and she unpacks why places like Homs and Damascus can experience the same national crisis but emerge with very different social fabrics. Ola, welcome to the International Risk podcast.
Hello, Dominic. Thank you for having me.
Well, I've been really excited about our conversation, and I know you've got a lot of history in Syria and you've got so much experience. So, thanks very much. I'm really looking forward to unpacking and hearing more of your insights today. And to begin with, when you look at Syria today, what do you think is the most important thing for people who are outside the country to understand about the situation in Syria?
Yes, great question. Well, 1 year after the fall of Assad regime, the country is still undergoing massive transformation. The situation today in Syria is not optimal at all. However, there have been many concrete achievements, more at foreign policy, diplomacy, less domestic leader. There are many challenges today in Syria at the domestic level facing the new government, and they consist many threats, for the transition toward democracy, hopefully, and toward stability. One of these challenges is the question of identity. And the identity, I won't say identity crisis, it's more the identity conflicts going on since before the fall of Assad, since the creation actually of today's Syria in 1946. And to start, maybe if we want to talk about identity, like for our listener, like what's identity, for instance? Well, identity is a very paradoxical concept. It can be a source of stability and of instability. It can be a source of violence and of tolerance. So identity is a fluid. It's changed over time and across space. There is no fixed definition for identity. It entails the group of affiliations an individual would have toward a place, a state, a tribe, a religion. These affiliations are the layers of an identity. So identity is multi-layered. Each layer, or all these layers, can either function peacefully, coexist in a harmonious way, or can clash and hence trigger identity clashes. And when it comes to Syria, the question of identity has always been there since, as I said, the creation of today's Syria and within its border in 1946. And it's rooted in a long history of imperialism, of colonialism, of authoritarianism. When Hafiz al-Assad, Assad father, arrived to power in the early 70s, um, he tried to construct an identity balance that consists of three main identities that has been always.
And I'll just jump in then, just so we can break it up a little bit. But one of the things I really liked you talking about with the potential risks inside Syria at the moment. I really been looking at this for some time, and the things that concern me, I think there's three main ones, and that's around legitimacy. Does the new government have legitimacy? Are the people accepting the new order? And from what I'm seeing in the street, whether I speak to government officials, security services, who are clearly going to be biased towards the government, but also when I speak to taxi drivers, people in restaurants, when I speak to people in the street and storekeepers, I think they really are accepting the new order. So I've been really pleased to sort of informally give it a green tick for legitimacy. But then we look at capacity. Can the state deliver the basics? And this was something, it's very different to be a rebel force controlling parts of northern Syria to being an actual government controlling the entire state. That's something else that I've been really pleasantly surprised about the electricity, the water utilities, the effectiveness of things like traffic control, of the ordered society, how taxis are operating. It's been really, really impressive. And then I think the third one is cohesion, and that's, can the government prevent identity based conflicts? And I think this is really where we could have some really great conversations today. So, beyond the headlines, and you've of course spent so much of your time studying identity and studying identity in Syria. Why is it so central to understanding what's happening in Syria today? Like, what is so special about the topic of identity when it comes to Syria and understanding what's going on?
Yes, because as you mentioned, the social cohesion is very important for state building, right? Social cohesion interacts with social contracts and social covenants. So three of them are different concepts, but interact with each other. And they all interact with the identity balance. What's so special about identity is that in order to govern in a healthy way, you have to balance all the identities that are, especially in a post conflict situation like Syria, that suffered in the past from identity clashes. And why we suffered in the past during this 13 years of conflict that started as peaceful uprising and sadly turned into a bloody conflict for power, because identity clashes and identity issue was one trigger of the uprising.
I mean, I think if we look at some of the timelines before 2011, it wasn't so much that the system was stable, it's just that the Assad regime really tightly controlled everything. And I think this is the common playbook. We see authoritarian systems around the world. They don't necessarily eliminate identity competition. They warehouse it, they pull it out when they want to, they police it, and they use it as a tool. So I'd love to hear from you. If we look at the pre 2011, so before the civil war, how did the Assad regime shape identity, maybe boundaries? How did they use institutions, security services, patronage, narratives, corruptions? And what were the tensions that the Assad regime was trying to manage and suppress before the civil war?
Yeah, excellent question. But can I comment on civil war? I think, we can't just say that it was a civil war. It's a multi-layered conflict. One layer of it is the civil war. It's, as we know, it's kind of a geopolitical struggle and civil war, which all started as peaceful movement, as we all know. Very good question. We always need to go back to history. Yes, if you look at the identity balance in Syria, it did function for about 50 years, half a century, and then it broke down. Why? Because when Hafiz al-Assad did build this identity balance in the early 70s, he built it in kind of a contradictory way. So, as I said, the identity balance in Syria consists of three main identities: Arab nationalism identity, Islamic identity, and Syrian national identity. So Hafiz al-Assad in the early 70s, he constructed the identity balance, put Arab nationalism identity as umbrella identity, under which would come Islamic identity and Syrian national identity. Why he did this? He did this for, as you said, at the authoritarian regime. He did, the main aim was his own survival and legitimacy, belonging to an Alawite religious group. We know that the Syrian community is a mosaic of community. We have a lot of religious, I hate to use the word minority, I believe it's a colonial term. So we have a lot of religious communities: Christian, Alawites, Druze, Sunnis. So Hafiz al-Assad, when he created this identity balance in a contradictory way, how? He reinforced Arab nationalist as umbrella identity, but it's a secular Ba'athist ideology on the one hand. On the other hand, at the same time, he was reinforcing Islamic identity from above, trying to strengthen a particular version of a Sunni Sufi identity from above to maintain power. On the other hand, he was emphasizing Syrian national identity, but at the same time, he was relying on Asabiya, the Ibn Khaldun brilliant theory of group solidarity. So he relied on Alawites, of member of his group, to try to contain power, and this functioned for 50 years, but it was, kind of a trigger for the uprising, and at the same time it was a result of the uprising. During the uprising, which turned into a bloody war, there was a daily process of reconstruction of Alawite identity, Sunni identity, and we see all sub-state identity, sectarian identity like Sunni, Alawite, Christian, and Druze jump into this balance, and try to compete for power. And they are all stuck in a security dilemma, uh, each group fearing the domination of the other.
Now, your work, Ola, you've compared Homs and Damascus, and I think this is really powerful because it really breaks down that single story narrative. And I've had the real blessing since 2013 of working in the north of Syria, on the crisis that is affecting the northern part of the country. So it's been really powerful for me to actually see Damascus and see the other side, of what was occurring, because it's not a single story narrative. Yes, there was a war over the entire country since 2011, but very different trajectories. And I think the war affected different communities in very different ways. Can you help us understand what were the key drivers that made this play out very differently in Homs versus Damascus? Was it demography? Was it the local political economy? Was it the security architecture? Was it displacement patterns, or is there something else that we don't understand?
Uh, Basically, it's one, the collective memory of violence. Like, for instance, in Damascus, and here I'm not talking about the suburbs of Damascus, there was no collective memory of sectarian clashes. But in Hamas, there are many, many massacres and many events where Alawites would attack a Sunni neighbor, and violent clashes would appear. The social class structure as well, like Hafiz al-Assad, when he came to power in the early 70s, he established an alliance with the Sunni elite of Damascus, and to safeguard his survival. And we can see that this alliance kept him power during the kept functioning during the uprising.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important because, one thing I've seen around the world, and I've had the real blessing of working in so many communities that have been affected by war. And something that I see is identity often hardens and it can follow either incentives or, on the other side, fear. And, that could be protection, access to jobs, safe passage through parts of the country, justice, revenge. Now, I think, to your point, I think moral language can come a little bit later, but I think on a day to day basis, it's that survival logic that comes first. And so, if we look at the period from 2011 to 2024, what do you see as the main mechanisms that really intensified these identity boundaries? I mean, we saw militias form, we saw sieges. I mean, a lot of people might have forgotten back in 2014-15, we saw huge cities like Aleppo actually surrounded and sieged. And then there were other cities, of course, that suffered from that as well. But of course, there were these detentions that were, if you haven't heard the stories, then they're absolutely heartbreaking. Of course, there was forced displacement, property seizures, aid distribution. What were the things that really mattered over that 13-year period that really affected the identity that people clung to?
Like, the collective memory of violence, as you said, like for instance in Mukhayyam al Yarmouk, which is at the suburb of Damascus, there was it's if you go have a walk there now, you will be horrified. It's flattened down the whole camp, and it's a camp but it's with building. So, for instance, the security services, the regime forces imposed a siege on Mukhayyam al-Yarmouk for 12 months. Picture were horrible, and until now, like just last week, next to Mukhayyam al-Yarmouk, there is an area called Tadamun at the edges of Damascus. They found the dead bodies, you know. So until today, they are still finding bones. So this collective memory of violence in like Mukhayyam al-Yarmouk, like the siege of Homs, the siege of Halab. So I guess it plays critical role, you know, in triggering identity clashes and provoking sectarianism.
I think another important word that we might take for granted is citizenship, and citizenship, of course, it determines mobility, property rights, access to services, and I think this can be very closely aligned with identity politics. Now, I know you've done quite a lot of work on state formation, on citizenship. So, can you tell us how war, displacement, and administrative control in Syria has had a practical application on the people living there?
Great question. So, as we know, citizenship implies equal treatment for all citizens. It means equality, balancing duties and responsibilities. But sadly, there is a crisis of citizenship in the Arab world, not only in Syria. And why there is a crisis of citizenship, because citizenship should be embedded in state building. And here's another dilemma: there's a crisis of state building in the Arab world, and state building should be parallel to nation building. So the Assad regime, he did his formula of state building was regime building, not state building. So state building, you should empower institutions. Institutions were all monopoly of power to Assad regime, you know, for his own survival. And citizenship, it's extremely important, you know, but it should be embedded in state building. It can't be it because it entails, you know, all the citizens are equal in front of law. So you have to have institutions. Institutions mean state building. And this is another, in my opinion, an urgent, you know, a challenge that should be addressed by the current government is to start the process of state building, to start empowering state institution. Because if we want to as back to your point earlier, if you want to build social cohesion, we have to build it through social contract. If we want to rebuild social contract, we have to build it through institutions. If we want institution to empower institution, we have to have state building. So everything is connected.
Yeah, it really is. And spoken a lot about state building. And of course, we're now really firmly into that reconstruction phase, that post conflict reconstruction phase. But it's not just about capital and resources and things like cement, it's about social contracts, it's about credible security, it's about shared agreements, social contracts about the rules that govern how we function as a society. And I think how people behave is going to be particularly important. I think in an interview with Jeremy Bowen about a year ago, the leader of Syria, Ahmed al Shara, said, the old regime always played on sectarian divisions, but we won't. I think the revolution can include everyone. And I think there was a lot of people, myself included, that heard that and went, oh, that's great. I really hope he means it. So my question to you, Ola, is, do you think what you've seen over the last year or, now 14, 15 months, is reconciliation, is reconstruction possible in a context where identities have been hardened by so many years of violence, by displacement and cruel treatment by the Assad regime?
It is possible, but there should be a plan for it. There should be strategy to do it. It's a process. It can't be just enforced from above. And I agree with you. The current government and the president, since he arrived in power, he kept repeating that we want Syria wahida muwahhada, one united Syria. And we all want to see that. And I guess we're getting close to Syria, to one Syria, after the military, development in the northeast. But we're not close to muwahhada, a united Syria. we still need a plan to do that. And as I said, and as you mentioned, it's through building social contrast. The social contract, it's a key concept in any post-conflict situation. So building this social contract, we need also, because as you mentioned, social contract is kind of an official, document or agreement between the group in the society and the state on other hand. But we need to have social covenant, which is like agreement between the various groups in the society. So we need to rebuild the trust between the various group in our society, and then we need to rebuild the trust between the society and the state. How we can do that is again and again is through institutions and empowering institutions. We need to have accountability. We need to see transparency. We need to see, and accountability is essential. We need to see transitional justice as a start to rebuild the social contract and the social covenant, and to have the social cohesion.
And if we look outside of Syria, what risks do you think any unresolved identity conflicts today pose to countries beyond Syria, to neighboring countries across the region? And is this something that regional stability or international security could be impacted by?
I guess now, in the past, yes, but now, no. I guess now everyone needs a stable and, working toward a stable Syria. Having a democratic country is good for all the region, all the neighbor. When talking about geopolitical threats, there are many geopolitical threats, but Syria is not causing it. Syria is being subjected to it. This kind of, geopolitical threat. And here, when we talk about geopolitical threat, we talk about alliances, as you know, we talk about regional alignments, and alliances, regional alignments, always sit in the heart of Middle East politics. They have been shaped by Middle East politics and by the region, and they have shaped the region as well. And for instance, the new political there is a new political order coming up from Syria now, but I believe that it won't it's not a threat, a geopolitical threat, unlike the new political order came after the US UK invasion of Iraq in 2003, which as you know, had dangerous implication not only for Iraq, for the whole region. We saw the radicalization, we saw sectarianization, we saw the emergence of Shia bloc versus the Sunni bloc, and everyone, all this, alignments were clashing together and destabilizing the region. We don't see this today. Actually, it's the opposite. We see new regional order. We see new alignments emerging and working toward the stabilization of Syria. We we see, the U.S. playing role, not trying not to let the vacuum filled by anyone else. So, in my opinion, the political threat is not from Syria. Syria is subjected to this geopolitical threat, and mainly maybe in the south from Israel.
I'd love to unpack that with you. Just in my short time in Damascus here, I've come across delegations from the USA, from Europe, from Saudi, and from Russia. It's four large delegations, all operating independently, that it just happens to all be here meeting with different high level government officials just in the short time I'm here. So I'd love to hear from you how you think outside actors, including USA, Russia, Turkey, Iran, Israel, and of course the Gulf states, how they're shaping identity dynamics inside Syria today, sometimes intentionally, sometimes perhaps incidentally.
A great question. During the conflict, particular actors played role in radicalization, and identity clashes, which were mainly Iran and Hezbollah, which kind of did the more polarization, radicalization, and triggered, sectarianization of identity. On the other hand, we had Turkey, who played a lesser role in the radicalization of a particular Sunni groups and between the Arabs and the Kurds. So, yes, they played in the past negative roles in identity clashes, which caused more radicalization, more polarization. Speaking after the fall of the Assad, I see that all these actors are now, however, they do not, of course, share the same interest, but they are working toward stabilizing Syria. They all want to see a stable Syria. Their interests are not clashing, unlike during the conflict.
Yeah, definitely. It's very, very interesting speaking to people on the street when once I've built a bit of a rapport and established a bit of a relationship with people, gently walking into the conversation about regional dynamics and foreign power influence. And it's amazing to hear the opinions of people in Damascus about how they view Russia today and how they view Iran today. And perhaps we can leave that for another podcast, but very, very interesting to hear people's opinions today on what those foreign powers should and should not be doing in Syria today. But when we look forward, I really think education is just such a critical element for any country. I mean, we see that in the USA. We see how the education system has been a big focus of the second Trump administration. And this is the same in all countries. And I think education can really become a factory for future grievances or future coexistence. And you only need to read great books like 1984 or Brave New World to really understand that education is at the center of so many, the way we think and the way we operate. So I'd love to hear from you about memory politics, about schooling, media narratives, and community, and whether you've seen any examples over the last 12 or 13 months from the new government. Is this something that they're actively engaging in? And if so, is it something that you feel really good and it's a healthy direction? Or are there some red flags popping up?
Yeah, sadly, I see some red flags, and I agree with you. Education play critical roles in constructing identity, or as they say, quote unquote, everyday identity. So education, flags, media, the material structure, plays an important role in constructing identities. And today, the curriculums in Syrian, public schools stayed almost the same. They dropped the symbols of all Assad era. However, it's leaning toward more Islamic identity, a Syrian national identity with a Islamic flavor. So you can see, for instance, phrases like "fi sabil al-watan" for the nation. It's a change to "fi sabilillah" for the God. For instance, you can see national symbols that were empowered in the Syrian curriculum, like Zenobia, the Queen Zenobia, the Roman era queen, uh, downplayed in the curriculum. On the other hand, we see that some symbols of Ottoman era, they've been empowered. For instance, Jamal Pasha Safah, who used to be, which means he's an Ottoman figure who executed Syrian nationalists in 1919. So, for instance, they dropped the title butcher. They used to call him in the Syrian curriculum as Jamal Pasha Safah, Jamal Pasha the butcher. So now he's just Jamal Pasha. So you can see these small details like empowering Ottomanism era. For long, I've studied that curriculum myself, and for long believing, that the Ottoman did their atrocity in Syria. So now this is kind of changing. So, and it's dangerous as well. It's not only about, changing history of the Ottoman era, it's playing with, the minds of generation. It's so dangerous.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic example, and yes, definitely dropping the word butcher from someone's colloquial name certainly would have some influence there. And when we look at the corporate risk management and strategic advisory sector, we don't try and predict the future. What we do is we look for precursors or we establish key risk indicators with our clients. And the skill really is in knowing which signals and which indicators correlate with a potential escalation. And it could be stock markets, currency fluctuations, government policy, regulation, taxes, whatever the case may be. Or it could just be plain and simple security issues. But I wonder for you, what are some of the credible early warning indicators that you're watching out for to see if tensions are escalating or if the society is developing in a positive way? And what are the things we should be monitoring over the coming months and year ahead?
Definitely three things. The first one is the Kurdish Arab, relations after the military when, if we can say that, in the northeast Syria. So we have to try to monitor how the integration, not only the integration of Kurdish forces into the army, but also the integration of the Kurds in the Syrian society. We have to monitor this so closely. The second, we go further to the south, in Suwaida, between the Druze and the Syrian forces. We see how things will end. There seem to be now a tentative ceasefire. There are no clashes, but there is a stalemate. The things are not, going anywhere forward. So we have to monitor how would the Druze take some lessons from the Kurdish experience, that happened 2 weeks ago. The third thing, it's we still in the south. We see the border with Israel. In January, earlier in January in Paris, there was talks between Syrian officials and Israeli officials, and they concluded what they framed as a security agreement, or to try to monitor the de-escalation, to withdraw the Israeli forces from Quneitra. We have the Israeli forces in Quneitra, which is an hour drive from Damascus. So we have to see if things will escalate or if things will de-escalate.
Yeah, there's certainly quite a few things to be monitoring at the moment. And when you look more broadly, when you look around the world, Ola, what are the international risks that concern you the most?
The one international risk is to see if there will be, the ceasefire will stay in a place, and if all the actors will genuinely push toward stability in Syria.
Well, look, thanks very much for unpacking that, Ola, and thank you very much for coming on the International Risk Podcast.
Of course, thank you. And if I can end with, I see that there is a window of opportunity in Syria today, but it won't last forever. So maybe the current government should take this into account and try to address all the challenges at home more than addressing challenges at the foreign policy and diplomacy. And thank you so much, Dominic. I enjoyed it.
Me too. Well, that was a great conversation with Ola Rifai. She's the Deputy Director at the Centre for Serious Studies at the University of St Andrews. And a shout out to our sponsor, Conductor. The geopolitical environment is volatile, but organisations are far better placed when they've tested themselves properly. And the real question isn't whether you've got a plan, but whether you're able to apply it when it's under pressure. And with Conductor, you can run your own crisis exercises that feel fast and uncomfortable in the same way that geopolitical shocks do. So you can try it for yourself at conductor.com/demos. And today's podcast was produced and coordinated by Ella Burson. I'm Dominic Bowen. Thanks very much for listening. We'll speak again in the next couple of days.